Hello and welcome to another Times Members Question and Answer. Today we're answering comments and questions from our channel members on Frontline and other videos about the conflicts around the world and how that's impacting the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and commentator on all matters geopolitics. So our first question today comes from Smart Gran, and it's really simple. Is Putin next? Could Ukraine assassinate Putin? Well, I think this is in the back of the Ukrainian SBU, their security agency, admitting that they had carried out the assassination of General Kirilov, who was the head of the Russian nuclear, biological and chemical forces in Moscow. A very audacious assassination, only a few kilometers from the Kremlin. I don't think Putin is next, and I don't think the Ukrainians would dare to try and get Putin for a number of reasons. One, the political fallout would be huge, and that would have gloves off against the Ukrainian leadership as well. And actually, under international law, I don't think you're allowed to target the leaders of countries directly. Generals are fair game, but the political leaders of countries, no. The second thing is trying to get to Putin, the effort that would have to be put in to try and do it. He doesn't live in an apartment block where he's going to come out past electric scooters that just happen to be parked up against the wall or anything else. You know, he lives in very secure accommodation. He's transported around in a very secure means. So trying to actually target him and attack him would be virtually impossible. So not worth the effort. Much better to attack more targets like General Kirilov and publicise the fact that you've done that, because it's not just the impact from a military perspective, and General Kirilov can be replaced quite easily, any military commander can. It's that psychological impact for the other senior officers that are around the place as they leave their homes, as they go to drive to work, as they go out around their normal business, wondering if that's the time that they could get assassinated. That psychological impact is a key part of the warfare that we're seeing the Ukrainians push out against the Russians. The Russians tried to do it as well, but not as successfully. Of course, the Russians have tried to poison the wife of General Budanov, the head of the Ukrainian GUR, their military intelligence organization. So this is a bit of a tit for tat. But Putin, no, I think, is off limits. And another question from Smart Gran about Viktor Orban. Will the EU have to deal with Orban at some point because he could undermine Western values and cause havoc amongst the allies? Well, he's already causing a little bit of havoc. You know, his pro-Putin stance is significant, and he's causing havoc amongst the EU. You know, he's got a veto, like all members of the EU have got, when it comes to support, and you know, he's eking that out in every time the EU tries to support Ukraine. Now, every time it comes to that stalemate where he says no and vetoes what the EU is trying to do, he's eventually persuaded to change his mind and allow the EU to support Ukraine. That creates a delay, and that delay is not good in getting material support and financial support into Ukraine. But we have to question, what is it he's getting out of it? Because politically he will be getting more and more concessions out of the EU. At some stage, EU members are going to turn around and say this is unacceptable. But I don't think there are mechanisms in place to properly eject a country from the EU because they're disagreeing with a stance on Ukraine or any other matter. So this is going to cause, I think, increasing difficulties across the EU, especially as we start to see more countries, more member countries take an Orban-like stance in the future. So 2025, I think, is going to be an interesting year from that perspective. And again, Smart Gran comes up with another question. Why did the regime in Syria keep some alive and massacre others? What have we learned about the system of repression in Syria? Well, I think it's out of luck that some people were kept alive and others were massacred. You know, who knows what goes into the mind of a dictator like Bashar al-Assad when it comes to him dealing with different either ethnic groups or other groupings that are around the place. On the surface of it, seeing some of his historical interviews and his secular comments, you know, he did not force women to wear the hijab, he did not force religious extremism on his people, but he did take those that were dissenters and treat them in extremely harsh ways. I think this is one of these questions where there is no answer to it. Trying to get into a dictator's head, a tyrant's head like that is virtually impossible. Our next question comes from Joshua. Did thousands of Ukrainians die so they could have a ceasefire imposed on them? Are the Ukrainian people willing to accept a ceasefire or negotiations? This is interesting, and I think this is on the back of President Zelensky turning around and saying that two things. A couple of weeks ago he said that Ukraine may be willing to allow temporary occupation of Ukrainian territory for a ceasefire and then try and get that territory back through diplomatic means. And in the past couple of days, President Zelensky turning around saying that Ukraine did not have the military capability to take the territory back. And I think there's a bigger picture here. I think if Ukraine is forced to give up any territory permanently, then the implications that will have on Russia and Russia's future stance with regard to other countries is phenomenal. Putin will go away, and even if Putin goes, the Russian regime will go away, rearm, re-equip, learn the lessons, and come back again for more at some stage in the future. 2014 to 2022, 2022, 2030, they will come back. But the bigger implication is if Ukraine is forced to give up territory for a ceasefire, what about other countries that have got territorial ambitions? How would that play out with Xi Jinping when he's looking at Taiwan? And I think it would stimulate Xi Jinping to go and forcibly take Taiwan earlier rather than wait, because he would potentially think that 3-4 years of international wrath imposed on Russia is something that he could handle, and he's already preparing for it. China is already stockpiling oil, gas, and other natural resources. So this is something that we have to be very cognizant of and watch very closely. And no, the giving up of territory I don't think would be acceptable to the Ukrainian people. But the war is not going to be won or lost on what's happening from a tactical perspective on the front line in the east. Too many commentators focus on that, and too many commentators say Ukraine is losing because Russia is advancing. No, the war will be won or lost on what happens at the operational level. So that's how everything is coordinated together from a military and military political perspective, and the strategic level, how that impacts the strategic relationships between different countries and their partners outside. So strategically, it's the international community and NATO that's supporting Ukraine. Strategically, it's China, Iran, North Korea supporting Russia. And what breaks first? And these are all linked. The tactical battles can set the conditions to influence operational level and strategic level. But actually, if we look at it, Ukraine is winning at the operational level. The assassination of Kirilov, the attack on oil refineries, burning aircraft, Russian military aircraft in airfields inside Russia. Russia may be winning tactically on the front line, but the example I continuously use and have used a couple of times beforehand is during the Vietnam War, the Americans didn't lose a single tactical battle, but the Viet Cong won the overall conflict. Joshua goes on to ask, if they hold out a little longer, how close is Russia to folding, as they're teetering on the brink right now and Putin knows it? Actually, Joshua, I think you're right. Russia's teetering on the brink militarily through a lack of people. It's now relying on people coming in from North Korea, from Africa. It's got real problems. They're putting about 20,000 new soldiers a month onto the front lines that they're recruiting throughout Russia and elsewhere. They're losing about 45 to 60,000 troops a month. That's unsustainable. The Russian equipment depots are virtually empty. The Russians are now relying on North Korea for ammunition, on the Iranians for more sophisticated weapons, and the Russian economy is teetering on the brink of collapse. When Donald Trump comes in, if he starts to mess with the international oil price and drops the international oil price, then that will have a significant impact on Putin's ability and Putin's economic ability to sustain his conflict. We wait and see what happens after January the 20th, but it will be fascinating. So Russia is on the cusp of folding. However, whether Ukraine can sustain itself long enough for that to happen is another question. Thanks for watching this week's question and answer, and for posting your questions. Remember, if you want to access exclusive videos and have your questions answered, sign up for Times Radio and Times Radio membership. If you've got any other comments or questions, put them underneath this video or put them underneath the other videos that you see up on Frontline and across Times Radio, and we'll endeavour to answer them next week and in the weeks afterwards. But thank you for watching today. Goodbye.